Hello, everyone. Glad you can join me here again today. It's been a few days since our last stream, so I'm happy to have you here. I missed you guys. I know you missed me too. But today we have a very good show coming up for you. We want to talk a little bit about Andrew Yang, of course, some Jimmy Dore, Andrew Yang's appearance on Jimmy Dore, and a little bit about debating. And some Shapiro too, because we have the Shapiro podcast coming up soon. That's coming out, I think, tomorrow, which is Sunday the 7th, and it's coming out at 5 a.m. or something. So I'm not going to catch it live, I'll tell you that right now, but it'll be good. We'll analyze it, we'll all watch it together, it'll be fantastic. But I wanted to talk about Andrew Yang's appearance on Jimmy Dore, and actually what I think was a mistake that Andrew Yang made. And we'll talk a little bit about what that mistake is, but it's here's the thing. You've probably heard Andrew Yang say something along the lines of, if you get me on that debate stage, I'm going to deliver, because when I was in college or at some point he was on a debate team and they went to London and apparently performed very well. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's very interesting. But unfortunately for Andrew Yang, a academic debate is very different from a political debate. An academic debate has rules. In an academic debate, who are you presenting your arguments to in an academic sort of debate, or in a formal debate, let's call it? You're presenting it to a judge, and it's a judge that has some knowledge of the topics, and they're looking for specific things like facts and logic, and are you taking down your opponent's position with facts and rational, well thought out logic. But a political debate is a very different thing entirely. A political debate, you're not trying to influence a judge, you're trying to influence the general public. And that has a whole different set of rules to it. And one way that you can think about this is with an academic debate or with a formal debate where you're trying to convince a judge. When you're that's sort of like a taekwondo competition. So it's almost like when you go into that competition, you're playing a game within the confines of the game's rules. So a kick to the torso is 1 point, and a kick to the head would be, I don't know, 3 points or whatever it is. And at the end, the judges get together, they talk, and they figure out who won based on who got the most points within the realms of the game. And that's how a formal debate sort of works. But in a political debate, it's a lot more like a street fight, in that when you're trying to persuade, you're not trying to persuade a judge, you're trying to persuade the general public. And that is a very different set of skill sets that are required. You're not necessarily using facts and logic, rather you're using persuasion principles, and it's very much no holds barred. It's whatever is going to be the most effective, that's what you're going to use. You don't have to limit yourself to only kicks or only punches to the head. You can, like MMA, you can go in there and start grappling, you can suplex them, whatever it is you want. Whatever you want in a political debate, you're pretty much going to be able to do if you think it's going to help you. So there's no one that's going to tell you no in a political debate. The moderators can try, but as we saw with Trump, the moderators have varied effectiveness, we'll call it. So when Andrew Yang talks about debating, I'm concerned that he's stuck in the mindset of an academic debate rather than a political debate. And we'll look at an example of him on the Jimmy Dore show, and the mistake that I believe that he made was being dragged down into the weeds. And we'll talk about what that looks like after we watch the clip. But let's take a look at that. Let's see what this looks like. But first of all, I don't know if you guys have noticed something new about me, and it's the hat. No, it's not the hat. Although I do like the hat. Shout out to Tim Pool, always rocking the beanies. But we have, a nice headset here. We have the mic that we can use, so we don't have to use the iPhone microphone. So this should be a little bit better. Iterate and improve, right? That's what we're trying to do. And watch this. Are you ready for this? Iterate and improve. Ready? Bam. Look at that scene transition. Shout out to the real teacher Dan for showing me how to do all this. And let's switch back and forth real quick. There I am. And wow. That's fantastic. So we're learning and we're getting better every single video. So this is fantastic. Anyway, let's watch this video. Enough lollygagging here, Brian. Let's see what he's talking about.
Actually isn't to make things better for the consumer, even though that is one of the side benefits of it. The point of antitrust legislation and enforcing it is because you have too much of a concentration of power. And that's the important part. Right now, Amazon, over 50% of all internet sales happen through Amazon, right? So that's one guy having way too much power over our economy. And then Facebook and Google, 70 or 80% of all Americans get their news from Facebook and Google. So that's really concentrated power controlling the information. And so there's a lot of unintended consequences to that. So that's so don't miss the point of the real point of antitrust legislation. It's the concentration of power. And so you should be for that, even if it doesn't help the consumer. We should be wanting to break up Amazon, Facebook, and Google because it's way too much power. Right now, Jeff Bezos owns the paper, the Washington Post, the paper of note, and they never write an article about how horrible Amazon is, why it should be broken up, the fact that he's in bed with the CIA to a tune of $600 million, and the fact that he sits on the Pentagon board, and he's the richest guy in the history of the world, and he owns the Washington Post. That is way too much power for one guy to have. That is crazy that we allow that, and I would urge you to not use the litmus test of is it better for the consumer, but do we need to break up this concentration of power, which we definitely do. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree with the fact that that we did not foresee the consequences of this much influence and power being concentrated in the hands of a handful of organizations, a handful of companies, and a handful of individuals.
This is predicted, though, Andrew. This is not. You know that this is predicted. This is okay. Marx predicted this. This isn't news.
I mean, Marx did, in many ways. Like he was very on top of it.
So this is predicted. You knew this was going to happen. Don't act. This isn't a surprise.
Well, I think most of us, as someone who's worked in technology, the rise of some of these companies has been, in a historical perspective, very, very rapid. It's like you looked up and you were like, wow, that there was a point when we just thought of Google as like a pleasant website. We used to search for things, and now it controls, like you said, 80% of information and advertising. So this is the situation we have right now. And then we need to go big in terms of figuring out, okay, what is happening with our democracy? Is there too much influence being held in the hands of certain companies? And
do you think that's still a question?
It is not. It is not.
Okay.
There's too much power in the hands of a handful of companies.
Yeah. What are you going to do to fix that?
Exactly. And that is the question that we have to ask. We have to figure out what the world looks like after we do the things. And then if you break up...
Wait a minute. You don't have... So you say we can't have a solution until we know what's going to happen after we implement the solution. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that we have to look at the problems and lay them all out and then say, okay.
So you don't have a plan. If you don't have a plan, that's okay.
I have the beginnings of a plan, but it's like there are a lot of different things you have to do, and each company is its own case because each company operates in a different way in a different industry.
So just to put.
So. This was not exactly Yang's best moment, and I think even his most diehard supporters, the leader of the Yang gangs, I think they would agree that wasn't necessarily his best moment. And so what actually happened there? So before we get into what happened, Jimmy Dore, I've seen a lot of people talk about how they didn't really quite appreciate how he was interviewing Andrew Yang, or they thought that he was a bit combative or abrasive or whatever it is. But the thing is, Jimmy Dore is under no obligation to be nice to Andrew Yang. And Jimmy Dore is a progressive, and he comes into the interview with an ideological bent, let's call it. He's coming into this conversation not necessarily to find out what Andrew Yang believes in, not only that, but also to promote his own viewpoint. And so when he's trying to promote his own viewpoint, what actually ends up happening is they get into a little bit of a debate. And Jimmy Dore is a stand-up comedian by trade. And stand-up comedians have a very unique and specialized tool set specifically for dealing with people and kind of breaking down their arguments. And it's a very important skill to have. I've been with friends who are doing the stand-up comedian thing, and one of the things you need to be able to do is deal with hecklers. And if you can deal with hecklers, you can deal with people who are trying to debate your opinions too, because it's a similar skill set. So if you're wondering why he's talking over him, why he's interjecting at certain points, not letting him talk, it's a little bit of that stand-up comedian training coming in, because he wants to get his point across, and it's his show, so he can treat Andrew Yang however he wants. And if you think that is bad, if you think that's abrasive, just wait till the election actually starts. Just wait till the media starts getting going, because if you remember 2016, I mean, every interview with Trump from the media was either that bad or worse. And Trump had a very good skill set for dealing with that, in that he was able to elevate ideas out of the weeds and do what Scott Adams calls the high ground maneuver. So what happened here was Andrew Yang got dragged into the weeds of the argument. And the weeds of the argument is, how do we break up tech monopolies? Should we break up tech monopolies? Do they have too much power and all this? This is sort of the weeds of the argument here. And I want to talk about what I think the high ground maneuver would have looked like. And then I'll tell it to you as if Trump was trying to sell it. But the weeds are, is it good or bad to break up the tech monopolies, and how exactly would you go about doing that? This is all rather nuanced. And the problem is, when you get into the weeds, you can do this in an academic debate, because the people who are listening are also trained and they know about whatever subject it is you're talking about, and they're looking for facts and they're looking for logic. But in a political debate, again, it's a different story. So the weeds here about the tech monopolies, it assumes some background knowledge. And most people, when they listen to that exchange, maybe not my viewers, because my viewers are, of course, all very smart and very well informed, but for most average people, whenever they watch that, they're thinking, I'm not entirely sure what it is they're arguing about, but whatever it is, that Andrew Yang guy doesn't seem to have a plan for it. This Jimmy Dore guy, he's pretty passionate about something. I don't know what it is, but it sounds pretty important. And Andrew Yang has the beginnings of a plan, whatever that means. And so if you want to know why it looked as if Andrew Yang was so out of place in this scenario, it's because he was sort of being attacked in a way, and he didn't bring the argument to the high ground. So here's what I believe the high ground would have looked like when he starts talking about, too much power in the hands of companies. The high ground is the place where everyone agrees. So it's the place where the progressives are going to agree, all the people who are watching are going to agree. And the high ground, I think, would have been, we want to make capitalism work for us. So instead of worrying about any specific plan or any specific detail on how that happens, if he was able to elevate that conversation into a conversation about, we need capitalism to work for us, not us work, for capitalism and for the people at the very top. It's not advocating socialism. It's not advocating communism. You certainly don't have to agree with Marx to do that. And, that was a real doozy. You can already see the attack ads from the Republicans on that, or even some of the Democrats. But taking it to the high ground, to a place where everyone agrees, is kind of your only play there. Because if you stay in the weeds and you keep trying to wrestle and tussle in that patch of weeds, you're never going to get out of it, and your message loses a lot more effectiveness, especially in a political debate, where again, the goal isn't to persuade a judge, it's to persuade an audience. And you're not using facts and logic to do that, because facts and logic are pretty low on the persuasiveness scale. The most persuasive things are, of course, fear is number one, and identity is number two. And, they're pretty close, but fear and identity, those are some of the most persuasive things. And fear, of course, a lot of times is not rational. And if you're trying to influence and persuade someone, there's actually, do I have it with me? I do. There's actually a few principles when it comes to persuasion and influence. And if you want to learn about this, read Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, and he has a chapter dedicated to every one of these, but they are consistency, liking, authority, scarcity, social proof, reciprocity. These are the type of things that you're looking for when you're trying to persuade. And on this list, I don't see logic or facts anywhere. That's not a thing. It's not an effective thing for influence. But bringing the argument to the high ground of capitalism is not working for us, the people, we're going to make capitalism work for us. And if you wanted to hear how Trump would have sold this idea, for instance, it would have sounded probably something like, listen, Jimmy, I hear you. Listen, here's the thing. Whether you break them up or not, Amazon and Apple paid $0 in tax. We're going to change that. Listen, Amazon is ripping us off. They're ripping us off, Jimmy. And what we're going to do is we're going to tax them, and we're going to give everyone the freedom dividend, $1,000 a month. And that's going to be how we're going to do it. We're going to give everyone $1,000 a month, and Amazon and Apple and Google, they're going to pay for it. Because listen, Jimmy, capitalism is not working for us. We need to have capitalism work for the betterment of our people, Jimmy. We can't have this going on anymore. We can't let them keep ripping us off. And listen, you can break them up fine, but we can't have them ripping us off anymore. That, excuse my bad Trump impersonation, but that would have been the Trumpian way to sell this idea. And I'm not suggesting that Andrew Yang say those words exactly, but rather the principle is get out of the weeds, elevate the conversation, and try to avoid saying things like, I have the beginnings of a plan. Rather, don't worry about the plan at all. Because you're not going to have the specific details. You're not going to have the time to go into specific details about every single policy issue, about every single potential problem, about every single possible solution. It's impossible to have. So you need to be able to maneuver your way out of situations where you don't actually have the answers, or where the answers are too nuanced to really explain in the limited amount of time. Because a lot of times, even if you have a plan, those plans are going to change once you get into office. Once you're privy to, the best advisors, and you have knowledge of all the confidential information, and you have different people telling you different things, and you have the benefit of a broader perspective now that you're in the office. A lot of your views and opinions on things may change once you get new information. So having any strict plans at this point it's nice to have, but it's not. What's that saying? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. It's that sort of idea. So being able, and this is going to be something that comes up big probably in tomorrow's discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it, discussion with Ben Shapiro. It's definitely going to be a thing in the Democratic primary debates. If he gets sucked into the weeds like you would in an academic debate and you can hash out details, it's going to be a losing strategy. And Trump is really good at bringing things into the high ground, and I'll put some links in the description about what that sort of looks like. So what it looks like when Trump brings an argument to the high ground. He does it all the time, most notably with border security was a good one, where he doesn't talk about any of the specific details with how to secure the border, or, we'll have some fence here, and then we'll have some drones here, and then this area will be a wall. Rather, he just makes it build a wall. 3 words, nice and easy, and eventually he can negotiate down from that, and we've already seen him do that. So it's not all going to be a wall, it's all going to, you're able to put in the approach that the engineers recommend, and that's how you negotiate down from that. But it's effective for getting out of the weeds. You have something nice and easy that people can remember. But Andrew Yang got sucked into the weeds by Jimmy Dore, and so hopefully this will be a great opportunity for him to iterate and improve, and it's going to be pretty necessary. if he wants to be able to have an effective debate, because a political debate has two goals. There's two goals in a political debate. Number one is to get your message across effectively, to have people like you a bit more, right? People want to leave the debate liking you more than they did when they first saw you, or when they first saw the debate. But then there's a second goal, and the second goal is to make everyone like your opponents less. So you want to raise your popularity and lower everyone else's popularity. This is not something you need to do in an academic debate necessarily. But in a political debate, that's what you're there for, is to make yourself more popular, to take down everyone else's popularity. So everyone's going to be just as mean, just as nasty, just as abrasive as Jimmy Dore was, and in fact even more so. And unless we start seeing these types of, I don't know, persuasion jujitsu, I don't want to call it that. We'll call it a different approach. Unless you can see Andrew Yang bring things out of the high ground, into the high ground, out of the weeds, into the high ground, it's going to be very tough for him to get his message across effectively, because it would just be too easy on any of his policies to bring him into specifics. How are you going to do this? Well, how are you going to do that thing? Well, have you considered these 100 other variables? And that's a losing strategy. So bringing things from out of the weeds into the high ground is going to be absolutely critical, absolutely necessary for Andrew Yang. And we'll see how that goes. We'll see what happens with that. But anyway, I think that's enough for today. I wanted to talk a bit about... we'll talk about it later. But anyway, thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all next time.